Good evening, everyone. We are going to take a couple minutes to see how many friends and colleagues and community members will be joining us tonight. So thank you for your patience. We'll get started in just a couple minutes. The numbers are climbing. Welcome to our reading festival this year and our featured speaker, author Sonia Gutierrez. I invite you to use the chat as you're joining us this evening to say hello and welcome to our author, to your friends and teachers and colleagues. We'll get started in just a couple minutes. Welcome to our non-credit ESL students, our adult high school students, our MiraCosta students and faculty and staff from throughout the college. We're excited to have you here. Hello, level 4. Ingrid, thank you for your support. Jay, welcome from Sacramento. We had some wonderful students and a faculty member from Sac City earlier this morning. So we welcome you. We're grateful to have you here with us, joining on Zoom and enjoying our Southern California hospitality and important reading event. Jay will be sure to let your instructor know you were here. We're excited to have you. I see the numbers climbing. Again, I want to remind all of you, we do have the chat feature enabled. So if you'd like to say hello, welcome Barbara from Palomar. Good evening and thank you for your support. Sac City's in the house tonight. Welcome everybody. Oh, Rosalinda, you're here again. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing this opportunity with your students. Thank you, Carla, and so many of our ESL instructors for your support. We're excited to have you here. Let me give it just one more minute. Hopefully you can see Sonia's beautiful smile. We welcome you this evening, this 7:30 p.m. presentation. We appreciate your attendance and your enthusiasm, even though it is an evening. We know how hard you work during the day to get through your studies or your workday or your parenting or your life. And so we have extreme gratitude that you're joining us this evening for this special event. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone. My name is Angela Senegalia and I teach English in MiraCosta's adult high school program. And it is my extreme pleasure on behalf of MiraCosta College to welcome you to this event. We have a really special evening for you, and we are just really extremely delighted to welcome an author for this annual event that we have that also happens to be a MiraCostan, a true champion of the people, the community, and a beautiful voice in presenting her true self through her literature, through her poems and her stories. And you're going to hear some really inspiring things tonight, so get ready. Sonia Gutierrez is the recipient of the Tomas Rivera Book Award for 2021 for her novel, Dreaming with Mariposas, which is the novel we're going to talk about tonight in part. In 2021, she also received an honorable mention for the Isabel Allende Most Inspirational Fiction Award for her book. And she is the author of Spider Woman, La Mujer Araña, and co-editor of the Writer's Response. She is, above all things, a teacher, an educator, an inspirational figure here at MiraCosta and at many institutions throughout San Diego County and beyond. And so we're just really delighted to have her here. She teaches at Palomar, Cal State San Marcos, and in the letters department for MiraCosta College, teaching critical thinking, among other things. And so I really cannot say enough how delighted we are that she has taken her time to come here and present to our students and to speak to you about her experiences, what has inspired her in her life and through her journey in education and in her professional writing career. And so please join me in giving a warm welcome to Sonia. Throughout her presentation, we're going to ask that if you'd like to use the chat to express gratitude and thanks and to celebrate what you're hearing, we welcome that. We also have the Q&A feature enabled on this presentation tonight. And if you would like, at the end of the presentation, to be able to speak to Sonia yourself, to ask her questions, or to express your gratitude by speaking, then we welcome your responses in the Q&A. And with a little bit of time at the end of this evening, we will open up to students and attendees and community members so that she can hear your voice and create community with you. So thank you everyone for joining us. And Sonia, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Angela, for that introduction. And hello, everybody. I saw those comments that were coming in through the chat. And hopefully we have an opportunity to talk at the end. So I want to begin with a poem that came to me at a moment when it was like a dark time in my life during a breakup. And luckily for me, I'm a poet, and my mind, and it works in images. And I know that one poem has the influence to affect people in a very positive way. So I want to begin with a poem. I want to begin discussing my childhood, teenage years, young student at a university, and then a couple vignettes, and then return to a poem. So I want to start with a poem that's called Rising Rosa. And this particular poem will one day be in a poetry collection that I'm calling Sana, Sana, Colita de Rana. So in Spanish, we have healing words. And if a grandmother or if a mom tells you Sana, Sana, Colita, it means that you're going to heal from your scrape or whatever happened to you. So again, Rising Rosa. A tiny little rose with swirling yellows and red, standing 7 inches tall, woke up this morning to tell me, breathe deeply when your head hangs low. And when you forget the smell of a tiny little rose like me, breathe deeper. Last week, my petals were caught in a downpour, and today, the sun with its long fingertips turned life's muggy colors into a cobalt blue. And that's what I want you to always remember, right? If we're living, during a time, that is difficult, we always have to have faith that that life will be better for us. So again, this is Rising Rosa from a future poetry collection that will be called Sana Sana, Colita de Rana. So I want to tell you a little bit about my childhood. And also I want to say thank you so much to my colleague at Palomar College. I saw you, Barbara. I saw your name appear that you're here with us. So a little bit about my childhood. How is it possible that a child, right, whose parents do not know how to read or write, how does a person from that upbringing become a poet? How does that person become a writer? How does that person become a professor? So as a child, I was a very inquisitive child. I was always asking questions, so it makes sense that I became a professor. So really the critical thinking in my life begins with my father. So my father, when I was a child, and he did the same for my sister, he would pull a chair and he would sit us down and he would ask us a question. And then he'd say something like, "Oh, you're not ready," or "Oh, you're ready." So as a child, I would think like, what does he mean? Like I'm ready or I'm not ready. So really that is the where I learned to think critically. I also remember that in CCD, I remember the children said that thorns were evil. So for me, I was like, how is it possible that thorns can be evil? So I questioned the logic of children, and I also questioned the logic of adults. So for me, it was very clear that that was not that I didn't know, faulty analogy, but I knew that it wasn't clear. So then, so I knew that, and then later, as I became a professor, I teach my students to recognize these fallacies. And so another thing is that as a young child, I knew that sometimes when adults were speaking, what they were saying did not make sense. It didn't make sense to me. And again, it meant that even as a child, I could already question and observe. And even if society believed that they were in the right, for me, it was very clear that what was happening was incorrect and that I could do something to be part of a solution. I'll give you an example. I remember when I was a child, we were part of a relay team. And in that relay team, the majority of my group was Latino. We were young Mexican American students. And I recall that there was a neighbor, and her name was Robin, and she was white, and she didn't have a group. And something within me told me, we are in a group, and we need diversity, and we need equity in this group. And so, as a young elementary student, I advocated for my classmate and said that I thought it would be fair if we could add her to the group. So that perspective of social justice has always been a part of my vision. And what is beautiful, right, is that when we have that vision, we already have that vision without a degree. And then, of course, we go earn a degree, and it validates what we already know. So I need you to know, right? Because I know that for many of you, you're in a place where it's like you're going to college, you're taking classes. It can be overwhelming. It can be stressful. However, you always know that if we work at what we do, and we are patient with ourselves, we are patient with how we learn, and we trust ourselves, and we keep going, that eventually these dreams do happen. I want you to know that if you are at a community college, it means that if you transfer, the numbers are in your favor. So, in case you don't know, in the United States, transfer students have a high retention at a university. Transfer students have a success rate, and it's real. We can quantify the numbers. So, as a former student that went to public school, I went to a high school locally. I went to a community college, and I had parents. They're so funny. When I had parents that said, "Pero mija, ¿por qué te quieres ir lejos? Ahí está la universidad." So my father would say, like, "Why do you want to go so far away for college?" They didn't understand, right? That that people go to these universities because that's where like people go for that particular discipline of teaching or architecture. And my parents didn't know that. They said, your school is there locally. you have a university that's very close, so you're going to go to a community college and you're going to go to a university. And so then the step of high school came. And in high school, um, as far as being a student, nobody mentioned college. I do remember being part like a type of like a business kind of a administration type of cohort. I always picked the like the creative part. There was no Avid, there was no Gear Up when I was a student. And really, to be honest, I went to college because of my father. Had it been for my that historical time period that I lived, it wasn't encouraged. It wasn't like I went to a counselor and the counselor, inspired us to go to college. I didn't go through that era, unfortunately. And once I went to college, it was fascinating. It was fascinating because there was a group of Chicanos, Mexican American students, and I saw those students as radical. In my eyes, those were the radical students. And those were the students that were in Mecha. Those were the students that were camping out in front of Palomar College to make sure that their voices were being heard. And then fast forward to Sonia being at the university. Guess what? Those very radical students invited me to give workshops. And so I became the radical one in a very positive way. So I would select topics such as the representation of female bodies in Lowrider magazine. I would select topics such as the patterns of semiotic symbols in Chicano. So for instance, where does where did Cesar Chavez get the idea of the flag that he used? So my brain worked at a level of before the conquest. So that means that we were colonized as Mexican American people, meaning Mexican. So we were colonized, and so then we were given, the numbers, and we were given the numbers that obviously I know already existed, but a language through writing. And so in my heritage, look around me, right? So to me, images work at a very, very deep level, and nobody could take that away from me. And that was my cultural heritage. Yoso calls it cultural capital. That was my capital. And I could understand, all these symbols that were happening. And luckily for me, writing was a symbol, and writing was a symbol that I could understand at a very deep level. So that means that, like, if, for instance, if a professor wrote me an email, I would analyze the professor's writing, and then I would notice that there was a dash, like the long one. There's the N dash, and there's an M dash, and there's a hyphen. Well, I was curious how that M dash was being used. Like, what was the purpose? So I was looking at a very deep level at writing when I was a community college student in an English class. And it almost, as I'm telling you, I also realized that I had professors and they taught me. However, I was analyzing what wasn't being taught. Like, I was looking for the patterns and writers, and how they were writing these poems. So for instance, I took an introduction to literature class, and luckily for me, my professor, there was one day where he wasn't feeling well, and he said, Sonia, do you read Spanish? And I said, yes, I do. And so I went to the front of the class and I read Federico Garcia Lorca's poem, La Guitarra. And then I also read Octavio Paz with The Eyes Closed, Con los Ojos Cerrados. And the Federico Garcia Lorca poem was The Guitar. Oh, like for me, as a student that obviously I had read poems in high school, I had never read a poem in Spanish. So it was for the first time in my life in an introductory to literature class where for the first time I was reading poetry. And guess what? I could understand it. I could understand it because my parents were poets. And you're like, how are you saying that? I thought you said that your parents couldn't read and they couldn't write. Yeah, they couldn't read or write. But remember, my parents come from an oral tradition. So that means that all how they spoke was very, very poetic. I'll give you an example. When I was growing up, if my mom said, get ready to dinner, this is what my mom would say. She would say, mija, afila tus dientitos, ya vamos a comer. So this means, Sonia, sharpen your teeth, food's almost gonna be ready. And who speaks like that, right? Look, who says, oh, sharpen your teeth? But my parents were illiterate. So that means that the way they spoke was very poetic. Like everything I had to imagine like what they were telling me and not just let's come and eat, right? So at a very young age, I understood that also the reason why I'm very analytical of these symbols was really because of my literate parents. How so? My parents, if you remember, there's a vignette where the characters Elena and Francisco are traveling, but they don't know how to get somewhere. But they're thinking about, oh yeah, there's a sign and this is how you. Yeah, I think we're gonna get there, right? So that was inspired by real life. Also, an overlap by Tomás Rivera, because there's a vignette in Tomás Rivera, Y no se lo tragó la tierra, and the earth did not devour him, where they're going to be migrating to Utah. And then they're talking to each other and they're saying, compadre, but does Utah really exist? Because they can't read, you don't trust. You don't trust. How do you know? How do you know? We can trust what we see. I trust that there's a moon because I can see it. But this paper, how do we trust the paper? Utah, right? So it's different. Our minds work differently. Like for instance, what I explain to my students is you have been given language, English, Spanish, your beautiful language. And we trust that language we can communicate. So I expect you in this class to be able to read poetry and trust those symbols. What do doors mean? What do windows mean? What do trees mean? And so for my parents, that means that if I would say, you tell somebody like my parents how do you get to the beach without having to say, well, that's really easy. You just get on the freeway and you head this in this direction. Well, somebody like my parents, you wouldn't be able to say that. So you would say something like, you're gonna head in the direction of, there's a lake. And there's this lake, and then you're gonna keep going, and then there's this like, there's this grove of trees on the right, and that's the difference. And that is why, if you read Dreaming with Mariposas, you'll notice that I'm very descriptive. Well, that's part of my heritage, that my parents were illiterate. And so I needed to find a way to be descriptive so my readers could visualize what I was saying. So we're talking about my writing. So I think it's a good idea if, how about if I read and then I continue back to the stories that made Sonia. So Las Muy Muy is capturing the historical context of the 80s and 90s. And I want you to reflect about what it was like for you and being in elementary, what you were allowed to speak and not say, or you know, what we don't, they didn't tell us sometimes, but there was rules there. In my case, it was really open. It was growing up in the 80s, and it was very anti Hispanic, anti immigrant, anti Spanish. And so I wanted to capture that with, yes, Las Muy Muy. Thank you, Carla. So that's on page 58. Thank you, Carla. So let's get started on Las Muy Muy. At our new school, San Marcos Elementary, no more than 100 feet away from our house on West San Marcos Boulevard, we were las que se creían muy, muy. The ones who thought they were all that. Not because we were spoiled, but because we only spoke English at school. Ironically, the kids at our new school didn't know we weren't coming from Vista Santa Fe Elementary, an English only school. I see, se creen muy, muy. Said Yanni with her imposing short stature as she dug her little white tennis shoes on the playground's black asphalt and pushed her small frame forward with her arms crossed. At school, the voices echoed through the hallways as we walked by. They only want to speak English. Look at them. They only speak English. Se creen muy, muy. Se fecrefen mufui, mufui. But because Miss Clifton, our teacher, talked privately to Yanni and the girls who taunted us most and explained why we only spoke English at school, the bullying stopped. Many of the students at San Marcos Elementary had been born here, but they didn't speak English. We, the Martinez sisters, had become miniature robots with on and off switches, programmed to only speak English at school and Spanish at home, even when Dad wasn't around. Father had made it very clear. We would only be speaking Spanish at home. Aquí en esta pinche casa solo se habla español, he would say as his throat tightened and turned rooster red. And our Mexican father was no joke. For someone like my father who upheld Mexican standards, since it would be embarrassing for a Mexican born to raise children who didn't speak Spanish. Or God forbid, Mexican parents raise a child with a Pocho accent who spoke Spanglish, or a child who didn't speak Spanish at all. One Christmas, the school sent us home with a Christmas gift booklet. If our class sold the most items, we would get an ice cream party as a reward. And because I wanted to win an ice cream treat, I walked on East Los Angeles Street, next to our apartment complex, selling what my parents couldn't afford. I stood at the door on East Indian Rock Street, feeling overwhelmed by the flood of questions, and answered, I don't speak Spanish. When those words came out of my mouth, I didn't know where they had come from. What I did know is Dad would never find out about this incident. Never, never. Nunca, nunca. So in the end, right, we know that the title of the book is Dreaming with Mariposas. So as a border region, that means that Spanglish wins, regardless of the language purist, right, in English or in Spanish. How is Paloma en Crucito? That's a good, I see that question right there. let me go back to Paloma and Crucito. Let me tell you about the historical context that I needed people to understand. I need you to understand that as an author, I have cousins that don't speak Spanish. I have cousins that speak English. And regardless, I love my cousins. It doesn't matter, if we don't share the same language. But I also know that as a human being, my parents, Spanish speaker, obviously it was the colonizing tongue. That language opened the door of Latin America, of Cuba. So I have a very big family. And in English, wherever I go, I can speak it and I can communicate. So I want to also highlight that it was very painful times in the 70s and the 80s for people, right? People were called pochos. So the pocho is a very derogatory. It's like a seed that doesn't make it. That's the pocho. So this is las muy muy, and somebody asked, I don't remember the name, how is Paloma and Crucito? Well, I have one sister and I have two brothers. So that means that the character of Paloma was inspired by my sister, but sometimes as writers, we take so many creative liberties. Some of maybe something happened really to me, but in the book it happens to Paloma. And then Crucito, I have two brothers, right? So what happened to my brothers? What happens when we're part of toxic masculinity, not just in the United States, but also in Mexico as machismo? What happens when people have double standards? So in my case, my little brother, who was brilliant, who was part of the group of students, he created a desk at San Marcos High School for the principal. The kid, that was on the cover of the newspaper for his science projects, that was one of my brothers. And so that brother becomes part of the statistics, right, of Latinos and early pregnancy. That brother started college and in the end decides that family is what he wants. He makes a lot of money. He works with a company that also has a French company in France. So they actually pay for my brother to go and stay in France, and he has friends that are French. So when the owners and the friends come from France and they're asking my brother questions, they think my brother is an engineer. So that's one of the inspirations of Crucito. Do you remember the character Beto? Beto is the one cousin that is deeply in trouble, right? With anger and with drugs. Yeah. So Carla, that character is inspired by cousins and also my little brother. So luckily for me, we did not give up on my brother. Some people believe that people have to hit rock bottom. But luckily for us and luckily for my mom, who is was an incredible human being, we knew that we could not leave my brother alone. So that was a difficult time for us. My brother is working on ships and is working in Washington. So those are the two Crucitos, is really a combination of two brothers. So to answer your question, I wanted to answer that particular question. So I want to go back to a little bit about the college student, Sonia. The visionary college student, Sonia, where I was part of California State University, San Marcos, And that was my choque cultural. That was my cultural shock, where it wasn't because I was going to a university. That wasn't the cultural shock. Once you go to a community college, you're going to be ready for these university classes and you're going to do well. For me, it's because the problem was is that I had grown up with nature. So I grew up with trees and benches and fountains. And then I went to Palomar College, which was, yeah, it was a brick building campus. However, it had an arboretum. So it meant that there was a vision of one student, and it was his idea to create this arboretum with all these trees. So that was my home. That's how I could connect with Palomar College at a very deep level. And then all of a sudden, I transfer. And I have to tell you the funny story of how I transferred. But once I transfer, guess what? There's no trees. And all it is just buildings. So there was a rumor that the person who designed CSUSM was actually somebody that did prisons, right? So we even found like secret pathways as a student, because that curiosity never went away. But I have to tell you, I don't know if you know, but sometimes some students back in the days, and maybe even now we've created pathways, right? And there's a reason for those pathways, because you're not going to believe this, but there were students in college that were there for 5 years, for 7 years, for 10 years, and they had like all these AAs, but they didn't have anybody to tell them that the next step was to transfer to a university. So in my case, I have like 2 AAs. And so mine is like, or the emphasis is liberal arts and sciences. So I also loved science at that community college stage in my life. However, I didn't know the path, like how do you go on to the next level? So lucky for me, when I worked at San Marcos High School, there was a coworker, Vanessa, and Vanessa told me, Sonia, I kind of think that you didn't apply to, like you didn't transfer, you missed the deadline or something. Here's this flyer. And it was a pink flyer, hot pink flyer. I might even have it somewhere. And it said, Open University Day. So I was like, okay, Vanessa's telling me to show up, so I'll show up. It said, bring your transcripts, right? So then, so I go and I show up on a Saturday and I have my transcripts and I'm waiting in line. There's this African-American woman. She looks at me, she looks at my transcript, and all of a sudden she's printing out a letter and it says, congratulations, you've been accepted to California State University, San Marcos. And that's how I transferred to CSUSM. Once I was at CSUSM, I was telling you that the campus felt small for me. My department felt small for me. It was like very little classes. It felt for me like very little. So my brain, my mind thought, wouldn't it be a good idea if I could take classes in the Spanish department and then they could count for like English? It's still literature. For me, it was like obvious and common sense. So I show up to the Spanish department. I go look for the chair. He's busy. His wife is also a professor there. So Dr. Darcy Strother starts talking to me, and I tell her, so I have this idea. I'm in the literature and writing department, but I feel like I can take more classes, and I'm wondering if maybe I can sign up for classes in your department and I can get credit. Guest, I didn't know how to write scholarly in Spanish. Like I knew how to like read and write, but not at not at the academic level. So so that was really, really fascinating how my brain works, right? Like, yeah, I can do it. Because my parents had modeled it. My parents can do anything. They're illiterate, they come from an oral tradition, and they have always been the people that are quality control. like that, that person that does construction, cemento, but it's the finisher, the person with the last touch. Those are my parents. And how do they do that? Well, because they're illiterate. So that means that you give them, let's see, this mouse, right? So there's this mouse, and then what they do is just look at it and be like, oh yeah, we just have to create another mouse. And then they create another mouse. That's how I believe that's why I'm able to have these dreams and visualize them, because I saw my parents do that. Because of Tomás Rivera and Sandra Cisneros, I knew they were both poets, right? I was a poet. And then there was this book, Y no se lo trago la tierra, and The House on Mango Street. And I read their work, and it felt like I could do it myself. And I was like, yeah, they're poets. They've shown me how to do it, even in spirit. Tomás Rivera taught me how to write. And then I could do it. I just believed in myself that I could do it. And I did it because I knew that it was rhetorical approaches. I knew the description and the imagery and opening sentences. And that's how I was able to do it. So going back to Dr. Strother, as I was leaving the room, she said, oh, you're a literature and writing major? You're an English major? And I said, yes, I am. She says, we're looking for somebody to go teach in Spain. And I thought, well, that's wonderful. I'm going to tell Dr. Berghoff, who is German, and I'll tell him so that way he can tell the department. So I go visit Dr. Berghoff. I tell him how it went and that they like the idea of me possibly taking Spanish classes and that they could count for English. And so I tell them, oh, by the way, they're looking for somebody to go teach in Spain. And my professor is just kind of staring at me. And he says, Sonia, like, what about you? And I thought, oh, yeah, me. But my boyfriend, my brain is like my boyfriend. I had just started with my pareja, Paulino, who's the father of my children. We're both professors. And I was like, wow, like, yeah, like I just started going out with him. So I go home and I tell my dad, I said, Dad, there's this opportunity, for somebody to go to Spain. And, I was asked if maybe I was interested. My father says, ay, mija, estás pendeja si no te vas. For those of you that understood that, he said in English, oh, mija, you're fucking stupid if you don't go. That's what my dad said in Spanish. And so then that's Sonia becomes the college professor at 25 years old. Like I go teach and yes, yeah, Tomás Rivera, the son of migrants, similar to my story too. I met Tomás Rivera's family. I sat with them at the University of Texas State University. That's where I went to go receive the award. And the president and obviously the assistant sat me with the Riveras. It was a beautiful conversation. And I'm going to share with you something that I didn't share with the other group. Guess what? Tomás Rivera, there was just so many, I told the family that there was just so many connections that I felt with Tomás Rivera. And they were kind of shocked too, because I wasn't just saying it. It was really true. Like, even though I didn't meet this man, like there was just so many similarities, like poetry, vignettes, educator, migrant, child. And guess what? You're not going to believe this. His wife and Tomás Rivera were purchasing a house in Oceanside because that's where they saw themselves retired. And then once he got the heart attack, his wife had a Concepcion or Consuelo. She couldn't go to the award because she had fallen. But the Tomás Rivera's children were telling me, and the brother, I sat next to the brother, And can you believe that? Isn't that incredible? Like the novel has a very strong connection to Oceanside. I'm not going to give it away. Okay. Yeah, that's incredible. They thought it was incredible. His daughter had to tell me that detail. So I want to continue with Dreaming with Aurora because um, I didn't have grandchildren. Maybe I won't have grandchildren, but I didn't have grandparents. And so in the novel, you see my abuelita, I never met her. And it was a very I learned that it was very painful for my mom to look at her mom's photo because I was a teenager when I saw this photo, and I confronted my mom and said, "Who is this?" And my mom said, "She's my mom." And I was shocked. Like, how is it possible for somebody not to like look at this face, right? Every day. And so then, of course, I learned that it was painful for my mom, right? It's where I get my cancer genes. So that means my abuelita must have passed in her 30s, and my mom passed when she was 59. So I've been asked privately on Facebook by a poet in Baja California who I was competing with. It's because I'm writing, and I publish a lot, and I thought, very fascinating question. I'm not competing with anybody. I'm competing with myself because I know that my time is limited on this earth. And it was so important for me to publish Pairo La Mujer Araña. It was important for me to publish Dreaming with Mariposas. It's important for me to publish Paper Birds, Pájaros de Papel. And I know that it's gonna happen, right? Because that fear somewhat went away. Because at least I have my beautiful babies, right, that are gonna stay. So Dreaming with Aurora. If you don't have someone, because something happened, it's okay. We have writing and we can recreate. Dreaming with Aurora. Ay, qué bonito es volar a las 2 de la mañana, a las 2 de la mañana. Ay, qué bonito es volar, ay, mamá, la bruja. It was November and the time of memories and dreams. She wore her long black hair down over her shoulders, and her favorite white gown touched her calves. Her bare feet were dry like the desert dust, craving for a drop of water. Under the chirimoyo tree, she sat on a concrete bench for a few minutes while she took in her surroundings that looked like her home, and then continued on her journey. She saw the rabbit on the moon peer through the tall almond tree heavy with flowers. Its leaves glistened and danced feverishly as she passed by. Even though the smell of the eucalyptus trees permeated the backyard, she couldn't smell. As much as she tried, something else called her. A smell more powerful. The smell of the bright orange simplasuchi flowers. As she got closer to the backside of the house, she recognized the geranium clay pots lining alongside the house. The estafiate and ruta plants were well taken care of. For a second, she thought they were hers, but as she approached a bedroom window, she saw her face reflected. She didn't know if she was La Llorona or a bruja or the two of them in one. Through her eyes, she didn't look terrifying, not to herself. Looking at her face did startle her a bit, but what startled her most were her feet. They weren't touching the ground. Her body slowly, heavy with time on her shoulders, moved to the altar where she found her picture in a wooden frame, the only picture of of her. The one with the long hair and a long braid. The candle's flame flickered, and the red, bright pink, royal blue, green, and yellow ribbon hanging from the window's frame swayed as she moved to a corner of the living room next to La Virgen de Guadalupe. Her favorite dish, mole rojo, frijoles, and arroz, was still warm with her daughter and granddaughter's hands. Next to the mole, her family had placed a glass of water to quench her thirst. She remembered who she was. She was Aurora, and her granddaughters, Paloma and Sofia, had guided her to the place of the living. After reuniting with family members placed next to her on the family altar, Aurora then visited Elena. Sleeping next to her husband, she found her in the same position she slept as a child. Her Elenita had her beloved Fortino's hair wavy like the ocean waves. Staring at her daughter's grown woman's face, Aurora leaned over and kissed her daughter on the forehead. Elena woke up, stayed still, and asked, "Mamá, ¿eres tú?" With no answer and heavy with sleep, she went back to dreaming. In the morning, I woke up confident. My abuelita had visited the altar both Paloma and I had set up for her the night before. I sat on my bed, recollecting my dream, then rose to my feet and stared out the window. I had dreamt I was walking. No, I was floating like La Llorona, but wasn't sure if the woman in my dream was Abuelita Aurora, a bruja, or La Llorona. It was November, and the time. Ay de mi llorona, 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 llévame al río. Tápame con tu rebozo, llorona, porque me muero de frío. So yeah, so that's the heritage, right? The spirit world, and I get to embrace that. That is the connection to obviously before the Coco film, and it's part of our heritage. My mom is at the cemetery in San Luis Rey, and all the festivities of San Luis Rey, the Day of the Dead, I'm part of that. Unfortunately, the pandemic interrupted that, but it's very alive. I noticed that Carla has her hand raised, and I think I'm going to be answering questions at the end. To conclude, I would like to read not the last one. I had planned the last one, right? But I want to read one that happens in college, because you have your own lived experience of what college is like, and there's nothing to be afraid in college, right? This one's called "In the Place of Books." Away from home, we regained our strength as we learned to walk for the first time on our own 2 feet. On campus, I could forget about Dad's grudge for leaving the house, even though he was the one who kicked Paloma out and I followed. After the heartache he put us through, Dad couldn't deny we were his Rocky girls. Like Abuela Chucha, I'm calling my father back because he's worth Abuela's love medicine. I don't look for cross streets like my grandmother. I just close my eyes, imagine my father, and I call him back with my thoughts. Because of Dad, I felt safe at school since he taught me to keep boys with bad intentions at a distance and stay focused on the college path. And he taught me to strike back if necessary, with closed fist or anything within reach. After my health class on my way to the restroom, Rico, a guy in one of my classes, asked, "Aren't you afraid?" As he stared at me, I replied with the question, "Afraid of what?" "Those books." He pointed at a psychology book, an anthology of literature, and two novels I carried under my arm. I stared down at my books, but I didn't see hissing snakes trying to bite my hand. No, not at all. I just have to read the books, make sense of the words on the pages, I answered with a smirk and a chuckle as I walked to the parking lot. Rico headed to his next class, and I kept thinking about his question, my drive to Doña Paula's, our temporary living space, for a few more weeks. "Aren't you afraid?" Was I supposed to be afraid of books? Was Rico afraid of books? Were people afraid of books? The books I carried under my arm compiled stories just like Ama and Apa stories. In Psychology 101 and Professor Gawini's literature class, we interpreted signs and symbols, just like my mother interpreted our dreams. Reading and writing didn't scare me either. College, the place of books, wasn't scary at all. Spirits I dreamed didn't scare me. Not the ghost type, like Abuelita Aurora, but yes, the drinking type, because I had witnessed Dad's transformation from a kind hearted father, although overprotective, to an angry totalitarian imagining evil spirits. Since Professor Gowany read my work to his colleagues and I had done well in English classes, I took it as a sign and signed up for journalism for the summer. Why not? If I could write for a college English class, I could write for Journalism 101 and write stories for the school newspaper. I was hungry for stories, hungry for telling stories, and looking forward to my first day of summer classes. As soon as I got home, I called Mom to share the important news. I twirled the phone's extension cord between my fingers while waiting for Mom to pick up the phone. "Hola, ¿quién habla?" I heard my mother's familiar voice and Paco singing in the background. "Mama, it's Sofia. ¿Cómo está? Is Dad still angry at Paloma and me?" "I'm feeling better, mija. Yes, you know your father. Okay, Ama. I have something to share with you." "¿Qué pasó, mija?" "Ay, mija, are you pregnant?" "No, Ama, mija. Ay, mija. No, Ama, why would you think that? I want to tell you something very important. I decided on my major, journalism. I'm starting my first journalism class next week. Journalism. Qué bueno, mija. Will it make you happy, Sofia? I think so, Ama. On the phone, I smiled like a Martina Ramirez, even though Mom couldn't see my face beaming with joy. Qué bueno, Chofi. As you have learned, writing comes with responsibility. Remember, when Irma and you protested at St. Mark's, readers weren't happy about the protest or the article in the San Diego Times. And even though Father Diego had to leave, the church made sure it replaced him with a bilingual priest who spoke Spanish. I know, Amai, you were so embarrassed when you and your comadres found out about the article in the newspaper, but haven't you and Dad always taught Paloma and me to tell the truth? Isn't journalism the same? See, Sofia, you're right. Being a liar and an hablador isn't good. Como dice el refrán, al que obra mal, se le pudre el tamal. I don't know if you remember, but your dad had a cousin who was studying to be a journalist in Mexico City. Really, Ama. My eyes brightened with the news. Why couldn't I remember this important detail? Yes, he was one of the students assassinated in La Matanza de Tlatelolco. Oh my God, Ama, I can't believe this. I can't believe what you're telling me. Your uncle attended UNAM in Mexico City, la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México, Miguel Martínez Solorio. That was his name, your father's cousin. Do you remember his picture? I do, Ama. He's the one with the Superman curl. I remember the small black and white photograph shaped like an oval and our Burgundy family album. I might even look into writing in Spanish like my uncle for UCS Post Fronteriza, Professor Gowamani, mentioned during his office hours. There are a bunch of writers like me. I just need to look for them. Mija, let me look for your uncle's photograph in our album. Please do, Ama. I wanted to know everything about Tio Miguel, especially now I knew someone in our family had studied journalism in Mexico. Sophia, did you and Paloma sit down with Jose to sign the paperwork? We're signing the loan documents tomorrow, Ama. Don't worry. Okay, Ama. I have to head to work now. Say hi to Cruz and give him a big hug for me. Te quiero mucho, Ama. Nos vemos pronto. Yo también, mija. Échale ganas, Sofía. Tú puedes. Mija, remember to take a nap if you get tired and drink water before you go to sleep. Salúdame a Doña Paula. Okay, Ama. I'm drinking more water. I swear. So this particular vignette was inspired by one of the missing uncles in my family. And I wrote my vignette, and I still wanted to know more about this uncle that comes back in the last vignette. We don't want to give it away. And it turns out that he was actually studying medicine. But again, there's this part of my history that is missing. And so what do? I write it, I recreate it, and I bring them back to this world through writing. So I know that I'm a little bit over, but I want to conclude with Promise, and that is a poem that came to me in the elevator at UCSD when a door closed, and then they invited me to teach a creative writing class at the Chicano Studies Department at SDSU. Doors. There are doors that open on their own, but there are other doors that, even though they are crumbling, they are locked under invisible triple locks. Their doors are at the bottom of the ocean floor, surrounded by white sharks. Those doors do not attempt to open on whims or with blows. Instead, roll up your sleeves. Build doors with paints and brushes, nails and a hammer, or with the magic wand of your imagination. One day, you will suddenly see foundations with friendly doors greet you. You will enter, turn back, and see from afar those ancient doors only have a few borrowed centuries left. Okay, so I leave you with the thought that we create the doors. I had to create the doors. If you see the injustice and institutional racism, like we can see, right? But then, nobody will silence you, right? With your writing, whatever your creativity or whatever your voice is. So my apologies for going over 4 minutes. Now we're going to go ahead and open to questions and comments. I know that there was a couple hands that I couldn't answer. I'm so sorry at the time.
Sonia, thank you so much for sharing yourself, so much of your life. I hope our students, our community members, our guests hear and see that when you bring yourself, your life, and the beauty of your experiences into your work, then those things touch other people's lives as well. So we're all, I think, just so grateful to have you here. We would like to give students and attendees an opportunity to ask you questions, to just say hello. So we'll give you just a second. Would anybody like to raise their hand or type in the chat if you'd like to be unmuted? And we're happy to give you a chance to say hello.
And
so
Angela, if you don't mind, Carla wanted to ask a question earlier, so I think we should give her, let her ask the question first.
Thank you, Carla.
So I do see Carla's hand up. So then if you would like to speak, Carla, and maybe one of Carla's students. I know she mentioned in the chat that one of her students used her link as well.
Go for it, Carla. Oh, excuse, Carla says it's one of the students. Go for it.
Yeah, if you're raising your hand, we'd love to hear from you. I see the microphone unmuted. If you're there and you have your hand raised, would you like to tell us a little bit about what you'd like to share with Sonia or ask her a question?
Thank you, Carla. I see your comment to open those doors, right? We open those doors, like we visualize it, we see it, we create it.
Okay, let's try Barbara. Barbara, would you like to ask a question? We'd love for you to unmute.
Oh, Barbara.
I just want to tell you, Sonia, what an honor to have been a part of this. And it's by sheer luck that I saw the connection. And your story, my mother is from Malta, and the stories that you share are my mother's stories. And the experience that you've shared is just sad and yet wonderful, the way you've conquered it, and the homage that you give your parents, because so many people would not admit that their parents are illiterate. And yet you sing the beauty of your parents and the wisdom. So I just want to tell you, I'm just so touched that I was part of this experience. And her student, she's an amazing teacher. I've been in her class this last couple of weeks, but you're such an inspiration, Sonia, and your students are blessed to have you as their teacher. So thank you.
Barbara, thank you so much. I'm so glad you connected and that you're here with us. Thank you.
My pleasure, thank you.
I see a hand raised from Regina, or maybe one of Regina's students. Would you like to unmute and speak to Sonia?
Hi, I think that's me. Hi, Professor. It's Bridget Roberson. I was just wondering, how difficult was it for you to write the chapter Alicia in the Company of Men? Or was it difficult?
Yeah, that vignette was inspired by 3 aunts that were suffering from domestic violence when I was a child, when I was a teenager. My father happened to be that brother that always came to the rescue. So it was difficult. What I find is that when I read that particular vignette, Alicia in the Company of Men, that I have to be careful, right? Because it's very painful, and I don't know that if I might trigger somebody when I'm reading that vignette. I have done it, and I think I read it. For instance, I read it at Tia Chucha Press allá in Los Angeles, and it was important. Like, we sense the room, and we sense it, and then we read it. So that particular vignette found a home in Huizache, and Dagoberto himself, the Chicano writer, emailed me to accept not just 1 vignette, but 3 vignettes. So I remember it as an important vignette that needed to be written.
Thank you. Rosalinda, would you like to unmute and ask your question? Maybe we can't get her unmuted.
There we go.
Yeah, Rosalinda.
Oh, there we go. Great.
Yeah.
Yes, as you likely remember, I was at your reading this morning, and I am doubly blessed and impressed with your reading this evening. I wondered if you would please address this idea of finding one's writer's voice. I've been speaking quite a bit to my students about that, and how the personal narrative is a beautiful opportunity to really recognize and develop that voice.
Yeah, Rosalinda, thank you for asking me that question. At Miracosta College, 14 of my students have been selected and I always tell them, don't say that I'm your professor. And 14 of them, one for short story, and the second one for the narrative essay. So this is how I teach writing. I teach 3 sample narratives. And for me, the ones that I believe are brief and students can see the multi-layers of narration are Langston Hughes' Salvation, very brief. We see all the rhetorical approaches that we're looking for in strong narration. I also have used, Rosalinda, the one, Elizabeth Wong's The Struggle to Be an All-American Girl. And we see, and then I use another one, but get to your point, is that only Langston Hughes could have written that story. Only Elizabeth Wong could have written that story. And there is precise diction that only Elizabeth Wong with her Chinese heritage could have written kowtow. And with the abbreviation of the words that Langston Hughes does. So that's what I tell my students, that in my classes, their linguistic heritage is welcome. So in dialogue, if they want to write German or French or Spanish, it's welcome. And that's their voice. When they embrace and they understand that it's their lived experience that only they can write. So I ask for students to look for stories that only they can tell. That's how I approach it, Rosalinda. And I do have your email, and I'm gonna head out to Los Angeles. I'm gonna take 3 students to the A2 Men conference in LA. But I promise that I will write maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, but I do have the screenshot of your email.
Excellent.
Thank you for the question, Rosalinda. Yeah, and thank you for joining us again. We did have a question, Sonia, from Ingrid in the chat. She wanted to know how autobiographical your novel is. She says, I live in Vista and I recognize some of the streets that you mentioned. So if we could share a little bit with us about that.
Yes. So when I was thinking at the beginning, was it going to be a memoir, Ingrid? I couldn't call it a memoir because I just take too many liberties. And I didn't want to be on Oprah one day and Oprah was going to be mad at me and she would say something, you call this, a memoir, but it's really creative, and I didn't want to get in trouble. So I was like, nope, I'm not calling it a memoir. It's a novel because I take too many liberties. So let's, like the auntie, it was really 3 aunties in one. In real life, I'm not a journalist. So, that's my creative imagination. The insight on Francisco and Elena and coming from the spirit world and Elena, and then that part, yeah, that's like the essence of Sonia, but just too many liberties, Bridget, to call it memoir.
Thank you. Inspired by, right? The experiences that we have. A couple of students wanted to know, when is your next book coming? A lot of them, they just can't stop reading your stories. And so they would love to know what's next.
Yes, so my next book is called Pájaros de Papel. Well, in English, it's Paper Birds, Feather by Feather. Pájaros de Papel, Pluma por Pluma. So I discovered poetry out of poverty. I forgot to tell you. So poverty as a graduate student, I couldn't afford my parents' gifts. I was in graduate school. So one day I realized that I had words. So that's how poetry came to me. Poetry came to me. And then I was like, I wonder if I can write a novel. I think I can write a novel. Tomás did it. Tomás Rivera did it. Sandra Cisneros did it. So my next book is forthcoming fall 2022, and it's called Paper Birds, Pájaros de Papel through Flower Song Press. And I'm also working on a picture book. It's called The Adventures of a Burrito Flying Saucer. So that's going to be picture book, and my vision is to pair up with El Moisés. Look him up. El Moisés is just out there, just like my imagination. So I have a couple.
We'll have to have you back then when all those are in publication so we can enjoy your company again. Or our students can look forward to registering in your classes when they go into MiraCosta.
Yes, definitely. So this summer I'm going to be teaching, as I recall, Introduction to Literature. I think I want to be teaching that one this summer. Okay, so let's see. Oh, of course. Yeah, Rosalinda, I'm seeing your the thread here. Yeah, definitely. I'd love to visit Sacramento City STEM Equity and Success Initiative. Oh wait, no, CESI or CESI. Yeah, sounds beautiful. Where can you find my books? Martha's asking, where can you find the books? It has about, Dreaming with Mariposa has about 60 sellers. My publisher is Dreaming with Mariposas. It's available on Amazon, and it just has so many people are booksellers are selling. You're not gonna believe this, but in Mexico, Libreria Gandhi is actually selling it. It's just incredible. So wherever you can find it, Martha, it's okay. Whatever works for you. Yeah, Amazon. And Amazon has the ability, like where you write a review, and it's always nice, right? When you see those reviews that report your work. Yeah, can you believe it? It's in Libreria Gandhi, only the ebook, but the translation is in progress. There's a scholar out of the University of Cincinnati that is working on the translation, and I'm going to be visiting the University of Cincinnati in April as a visiting professor. Okay, yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So we do have some students asking about signed copies, so I wanted to speak to that. When we invited Sonia, we had the ability to get some books to help students in the non-credit programs read her books. So we have several classes who have some copies. And so we're going to work with Sonia to have her give you her autograph and to commemorate this moment. We are also working on some flyers like the background that you can see here on my screen. This is a flyer that we've printed that Sonia has agreed to also write messages and her autograph on. And so we will be working on some opportunities to help those of you who are attending receive one of these things. So the flyers, we will have plenty available. The books were in the classrooms, but if you're in a class where you've been reading the book, then we will work with your professor, your instructor, to make arrangements to have Sonia to sign them. So good question. Are there any other students? Oh, go ahead, Sonia.
Yeah, and the handout, I usually like to go to a presentation and have a handout for you. So the poem that I read at the beginning and at the end, I actually created one for you. So I'm gonna send both Professor Mariana and Silva, I'm so sorry. And then it's so weird, like, okay. And then we have Professor Angela Seningaglia. And so I'm gonna send them the email, and then you're gonna have access to those two poems.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, Sonia. We're happy to make copies and to help students have those as well.
Or maybe, you know what I can do, Angela? I can put the poem in the book. What do you think? Like a copy of it. Yeah, so you don't have to worry about that.
Okay, that sounds great. Do we have any other students that would like to unmute or ask questions? This is your opportunity. I know we've gone a little bit over, but if you're like me and this is just such an exciting opportunity, I know if you have a question and you'd like the chance to ask it, we would love for you to do that.
Yeah. So let's see. We have still a couple people connected. I have to tell you a funny story. So yes. The photo that was selected was when I used to have blue hair. And so now, like I had like a blue streak, and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't have blue hair. So I actually dyed my hair for you. I hope you like it.
You're beautiful. It looks lovely. And the flyer that we created, the beautiful butterflies, mariposas here on our flyer. We thank you for sharing your cultural wealth with us. Such beautiful imagery that really captures the spirit. Any other students would like to ask questions? Okay, well, it's about 8:50. Once again, Sonia, so much gratitude for your time, your community, your life, and your just sharing and your inspiration for so many of our students. Your journey is like so many of ours in so many ways. We saw so many beautiful comments in the chat about conjuring memories of their own grandparents, their own journeys, and just the strength and perseverance that you shared with our students today, finding your voice and using that for good, for justice, and for learning, passing on your gifts to students. You couldn't ask for anything more. So thank you for joining us. Thank you to all of our participants for being with us to celebrate this reading festival. As I said, look out for some correspondence from your teachers if you're in a class, and we will get you some special materials. And good night, everybody. Thank you for coming.